Hi everybody, welcome to this video walkthrough of day 4's article. All right, we're gonna get started with this article about China. All right, it comes from the Economist, which is a great treasure trove of both nice language and ideas. Now let's get started. How China's reopening will disrupt the world economy. So right there and right then and there is disrupt the world economy, which is a nice phrase, right? Disrupt meaning that it will sort of like mess with the world economy in that sense, all right? Disrupt, let's see, prevent something, especially a system, process, or event from continuing as usual or expect. Yes, it's going to mess with it. A tale of death, growth, and inflation. All right, a tale means a story of death, growth, and inflation. Well, by death they mean the coronavirus, right? And growth, how it's probably how the country has grown, and inflation. Well, the fact of money, right? Getting yeah, the price is getting more expensive. For the better part of 3 years. Better part of 3 years means like better part of 3 years, meaning that the for most of 3 years, all right. Sorry, for the better part of 3 years is the same thing as for most of 3 years. Like for example, for 2 years, right? And a lot of people seem to mistake better part of the day or good part of the day. No, good part of the day means most of the day, right? You can't greet someone by saying good time of the day or good part of the day, all right? So usually have a better part of 3 years. It means like most of the 3 years. 1,116 days to be exact. So that's, again, you guys remember this, insert, what we're just inserting extra information, sort of like clarifying what those, what that better part of 3 years is, right? 1,000 and what, 16 days, 1,016 days is better part of 3 years, right? Because it's not fully 3 years, but it's more than 2 years, all right? So that's what they mean. You see how efficient the communication is and how precise it is. China will have been close to the world. All right, will have been closed to the world. So will have been close to the world, meaning that it doesn't, if how do I put this? It doesn't accept, or let's say tourists don't come there, right? Things like that. Most foreign students left the country at the start of the pandemic. At the start of, right? The start of something. Um, Let me just make it a little bigger, but I'm also afraid it may not be visible. Okay, just a second. Tourists have stopped visiting. Chinese scientists have stopped attending foreign conferences. Um, Expat executives were barred. Yeah, that's what we call like except. What does it mean? Is it expat? Expat means someone who does not live in their own country. All right. A large community of expatriates has settled there. That's good. I didn't know that. Expat executives, right? Executives like businessmen, right, were barred from returning to their businesses in China. Um, okay, so like, people who probably lived outside of China but were actually from China, right? They were barred, sort of like banned, all right? Um, Barred, prevented. To prevent something or someone doing something or going somewhere or not allow something. Okay, so barred from returning to their businesses. Um, okay, so when the country opens its borders on January 8th, turns out that it was yesterday, right? So opens its borders, uh, abandoning the last remnants of its zero COVID policy. Um, Last remnants, what does it mean? A small piece or amount of something that is left from a larger original piece or amount. Okay, the remnants of last night's meal. All right, remnants like remaining parts, right? Now, remnants of the city's former glory. A carpet remnant. All right, that's really really nice. Like, okay, abandoning the last remnants of its zero COVID policy. So they're sort of like abandoning their policy, all right? Zero COVID policy. So abandoning the last. So it's basically by opening its borders is abandoning the last remnants, like small pieces that is left from the zero COVID policy, which I believe there's still some cases of COVID probably, right? But they're still you know wanted to open its borders, remnants of something. The renewal of commercial, intellectual, and cultural contact, right? Um, all right. So when the country does this, right, the renewal of commercial, intellectual, and cultural contact will have huge consequences, mostly benign. Okay, benign consequences, right? So benign consequences, right? So let me just check what benign is. It's like really familiar, but benign describes a tumor that is not likely to cause death. All right, I see. If consequences are not benign, it means that it's well, it's bad, but it's not something necessarily going to cause the collapse of the country. Probably, I hope that's what it means. So that's the tricky part of the Economist. It's kind of hard to understand what they mean. I mean, for non-native speakers, right? But otherwise, uh, the articles are pretty, understandable in their meaning and everything. So when the country opens its borders on January 8th, abandoning the last remnants of its zero COVID policy, the renewal of commercial, intellectual, and cultural contact will have huge consequences. All right. So by renewal of commercial, intellectual, and cultural contact means what they mean is, well, getting in contact with other countries, right? First, however, there will be horror. Right? So by benign, they mean the consequences will be positive, right? The consequences will not be necessarily negative. First, however, so however is like used again between two commas. It is okay. It is allowed. You can use it at the beginning as well, but that's what they preferred. First, however, there will be horror. And pay attention, you can't use a, there will be a horror. No. Inside China, the virus is raging. The virus is raging. It means that it's on, how do I put this? Uh, it is still there and it is sort of like raging. If someone rages, it means that they lose control, right, of themselves and they are angry. But when something such as a disease is raging, it means that it's all over the place, all right? Tens of millions of people are catching it every day. Wow, tens of millions, all right? Hospitals are overwhelmed. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Although the zero COVID policy saved many lives when it was introduced, all right, a great cost to individual liberties. Liberty here means well, yes, I know that liberty means freedom, right? Whereas here, an example of speech or behavior that upsets other people because it shows little respect or does not follow what is thought to be polite or acceptable. Um, so what do they mean by that? A great cost to individual liberties. Individual freedom, right? So at great cost, yes, at great cost to individual liberties. By that they mean, well, that policy was introduced at great cost to individuals. So you see, a two brackets can also be used to sort of like give extra information, but sorry, but still remain non-essential. But still, it's sort of like extra information at great cost to individual liberties, meaning that a lot of people's freedom was undermined. It was compromised. So the government failed to prepare properly for its relaxation by stockpiling drugs, right? Okay, government failed to prepare properly for its relaxation. So what do they mean by its relaxation? Um, I think the policy, right? Relaxation, that's what they mean. The rule, yes. The act of making rules or the control of something less severe, yes. the relaxation of the policy, right? So they failed to prepare properly for its relaxation, right? So failed to prepare properly for its relaxation. By its mean, what they mean is it's the policy. By stockpiling drugs, vaccinating more of the elderly, and adopting robust protocols to decide with patients to treat where. Um, so they failed to, relax the policy, right? They failed to um, introduce the relaxation of the policy because they stockpiled. So it means that they stockpiled drugs. They kept producing drugs in mass amounts, vaccinating more of the elderly, right? And adopting robust protocols. Okay, adopting robust means strong and like healthy, right? Strong protocols. So adopt means to start something new. So adopting robust protocols to decide which patients to treat where. All right. So they introduced these protocols to decide which patients to treat where. Right. All right, our modeling suggests that if the virus spreads unchecked, some 1 million Chinese will die in the coming months. So let me try to summarize this whole paragraph. So what they mean is, so China has opened its borders, but inside it, the virus is raging, right? It's all over the place. A lot of people are dying. I mean, not dying yet, but they're catching it every day, right? And hospitals are just packed with patients. They don't know what to do. Um, and okay, so zero COVID policies, right, saved many lives at first, but the government failed to relax that, uh, policy in the sense that start to make it less severe, right? Like bit by bit. And why was it the case? Well, it was the case because they stockpile drugs. They sort of like let me just read it one more time. The government failed to prepare properly for its relaxation by stockpiling drugs, vaccinating more of the elderly, and adopting robust protocols to decide which patients to treat where. So they you know adopted these protocols. Like they didn't specifically chose everybody, right? So there was this um, demographic divide, if you will, right? That the government sort of like this was the protocol that they followed. They didn't they specifically chose which patients to treat where, and they chose only the elderly, right, to vaccinate, and this meant that the other demographic was still under threat, right? So that's what they mean, I believe. Okay, there's not much outsiders can do to help. That's also nice. There is not much outsiders can do to help. Okay. For fear of looking weak, right? For fear of looking weak, that means like in order not to look weak, right? In order not to look weak, the Chinese government spurns even more offers of free, effective vaccines from Europe. Um, so spurn, what does it mean? To refuse to accept something or something because you feel that you're not worth having. All right, that's actually a really precise word, right? Spot on. So basically, the Chinese government is rejecting help from Europe because it is afraid that it will look weak, right? So that's again, look at this sentence and look and pay attention to what I said, right? So this is much more effective, and that's what you need in IELTS. Well, not just IELTS writing, but in any other type of writing, for that matter. So spurns even offers of free, right, vaccines, of free effective um, vaccines. Well, that's really nice. Like offers of free vaccines, right? Not just free vaccines, right? Free vaccines offers, but offers of free vaccines from Europe. But the rest of the world can prepare for the economic effects of the Communist Party's great U-turn. Um, okay, but the rest of the world can prepare for the economic effects of the Communist Party's great U-turn. So I guess what they mean is when China is down, right? so will the whole world, right? But the rest of the world can prepare for the economic effects of the Communist Party's Great U-turn. So, Great U-turn, and I think the Communist Party is probably China. I think that's what they're trying to pay. Let me just check what it means. Communist Party. I'm not really good at economy, you guys. So Communist Party. Uh, so what is Communist Party? Communist Party is a political party that seeks to realize the social economic goals of communism. The term community party was okay. So that's one party, right? Um, so but the rest of the world can prepare for the economic effects of the community communist party's great U-turn. Okay, so the party that is responsible for the social economic aspects of the world, right? Okay, so I guess like now, U-turn is like an important change, all right? So U-turn is a turn, a complete change from one opinion or plan of action to an opposite one, right? The prime minister did a quick U-turn in response to all the adverse publicity. So it's a negative. It has a negative connotation to it, guys. So when there's a U-turn, it means that you know th there is a sudden change of actions, right? From the one to the real opposite one, right? So these will not be smooth. By these they mean economic effects, right? China's economy could contract in the first quarter, right? Wait, what do they mean by contract? Shorten. Okay. Uh, let's see. Economy could contract. Economy could contract in the first quarter, especially if local officials reverse course and seal off towns to keep cases down. Okay, especially if officials reverse course and seal. Course and seal. What do they mean by course and seal? Is there such a phrase as course and seal, or is it just course? Again, guys, this is a heavily. Let's just say that this particular article is heavy in economic terms, right? Economic or economical? Economic terms. So it's kind of hard for me to understand because I'm not really good at this subject, which is something that I wanted to share with you. I mean, this is something important to keep in mind, because even if you don't understand the article, you must do your best. For example, I don't enjoy articles about the world, like the economy and stuff, right? As important as it is, right? But I still sort of like um, force myself to read such articles because you never know. In IELTS, there are a lot of you need to be ready for everything, right? So that's why I make sure that I read articles on pretty much every topic, even if it means reading something that I am absolutely uh, that I absolutely have no interest in. All right. So what does it mean, like course? Um, I know that it's a direction course. It's often gradual, the way something happens. Okay, but course and seal off towns to keep cases down. Um, if local officials reverse course, right? So if they reverse course um, and seal something off, often because it's dangerous, sealed off the area. Oh, that's actually reverse. Officials reverse course and seal off towns. Okay, seal off towns. I know that what it means now. It means to prevent people entering that town, right? Especially if local um, officials reverse course. Reverse course probably means like reverse, like change the course of actions in the opposite direction, right? Change the current status in the opposite direction. But eventually, economic activity will rebound sharply. Right. So what they here mean is, China's economy could contract in the first quarter, especially if local officials reverse course and seal off towns to keep cases down. All right, that's what they mean. Its economy will um, will decrease, will take a heat, right? Um, if they seal off towns, if they reverse course, like, I mean, instead of keep probably sticking with the zero COVID policy, right? Uh, if they actually don't do that, right? Actually, the opposite, right? If they do that, then the economy will suffer. But eventually, economic activity will rebound sharply. Okay, so economic activity will rebound sharply. Okay, rebound means, well, it will sort of like get back to its original point, right? So it will eventually start taking off, right? So it will rebound, like recover, right? Rebound. This is the language I believe you can use in your IELTS writing. Okay, so task one, you can say at the end, like, it rebounded to its initial position, or something like that. Now, where were we? Along with the Chinese demand for goods, services, and commodities. All right. Yes, that makes sense. So, even if the country remains closed to tourists, it still can benefit from the inner economy. I'm not sure if that's a phrase, but that's how it happens. That's how it is possible that Chinese demand for good, services, and commodities, right? Which means that people will be buying from the government, and people will be making profit. So in this way, the economy will still remain stable, right? To some extent. Um, okay. The impact will be felt on the beaches of Thailand, all right, across firms such as Apple and Tesla, and at the world's central banks. China's reopening will be the biggest economic event of 2023. Um, okay. As this year progresses and the worst of the COVID wave passes, right? Wow, really nice language. As the year progresses, as we go along through the year, right? As the year uh, progresses, right, and the worst of the COVID wave passes, right? So we finally get it over with, right? The worst of the COVID wave, the worst of the COVID wave. Many of the sick will return to work. Shoppers and travelers will spend more freely. Uh, Okay, we'll spend more freely. Spend more freely means they can, start spending more money, right? Like as much money as they want. Some economists reckon that GDP in the first 3 months of 2024 could be a tenth higher than in the troubled first quarter of 2023. Okay, so what they mean is like how um, opening China would um, benefit the economy, right? First 3 months, so could be a tenth higher than the troubled first quarter of 2023. Such a sharp rebound in such a huge economy, right? Such a sharp rebound, right? In such a huge economy means that China alone could power much of global growth over the period. Power much of global growth um, over the period, right? Over the period, like from 2023 to 2024, and power much of global growth means it can, well, basically benefit the whole world, right? Its economy. The party is banking on it. Bank on something, but probably trusting on it, right? So bank on something, to expect something or depend on something. Okay, so the party, by that they mean the Communist Party is banking on it. Bank on it. It hopes to be judged not on the tragedy its incompetence is compounding, right? So the party doesn't. It hopes to be judged, right? Not on the tragedy its incompetence is compounding, right? So, they don't want to be judged on how their incompetence is compounding, how their incompetence is getting more and more, right? Like it's like multiplying. So I think that's good. Uh, Tragedy, its incompetence is compounding, but on the economic recovery to follow. So what they mean is, so yes, it you know we can expect some um, what incompetence, right? We can expect some um, tragedy, right, at first, but then the economy will recover, right? But on the economic recovery to follow. To follow means like what follows, what follows that incompetence, right? Economic um, recovery, recovery to follow, right? In something Jinping's year-end address, right? Year-end address. I think that's something we all should know. Like year-end address. That's the same thing that the president of Uzbekistan did, right, at the end of 2022, Murojat Noma, and that's what you call year-end address in Uzbek. Well, that's good. In English, the party chief thanked pandemic workers for bravely sticking to their posts. Um, okay, bravely sticking to their posts, like they are working, positions and stuff. And while nodding to tough challenges ahead, right? Nodding to, right, meaning tough challenges ahead. Like he nodded to, like pointed, right? Nod to. I think it's just used as a sort of like a metaphor, I believe, again, right? Um, Nodding, right? To move your head, yes. Nodding to tough challenges ahead, promise that the light of hope is right in front of us. The light of hope is right in front of us. The light of hope is right in front of us. That's nice as well. He sounded eager to look past the pandemic, right? Look past, meaning that finally, eager to look past the pandemic, to get it over with. Pandemic. Emphasizing the chances of a swift economic revival. Emphasizing the chances of a swift economic revival means sort of like recovery, right? And offering reasons to be proud of living in a rising China under party rule. Okay, so I think China is a communist country, right? So that's what they're trying to say here. The ending of China's self-imposed isolation, right? Self-imposed isolation. Self-imposed isolation. So self-imposed, what do they mean? Self-imposed. Uh, Decided by yourself without being influenced or ordered by other people. So um, the end of the year was their self-imposed deadline for finishing the building work. Okay, self-imposed, like decided, right? So they decided by yourself. Will be good news for places that depended on Chinese spending. Okay, yes, that makes sense. Now, like people will now start depending on China all over again, which is good news for them. Hotels in Phuket and malls in Hong Kong suffered as Chinese were locked up at home. Um, now would be travelers are flocking to travel websites. Okay, so would be travelers, future travelers, all right, are flock to travel websites, meaning that they are visiting those websites in great amounts, in great numbers. Bookings on Trip.com rose by 250% on December 27th compared with the previous day. Wow. Um, Economists are penciling in a GDP boost for Hong Kong of as much as 8% over time. So penciling. Um, so pencil somebody in or pencil something in, right? Was that it? Penciling in a GDP boost to arrange for something to happen or for someone to do something on a particular date or occasion, knowing that the arrangement might be changed later. So okay, so pencil in to arrange, right? So penciling in um, a GDP boost, right, for Hong Kong of as much as 8% over time. Well, that's actually really nice, because 8% of GDP increase in such a short amount of time. That's great. That's their expectation. They're arranging that in case it might change later. By the way, pencil in. They're not penning it, right? You guys, like, look at this logic. So they're not just typing it in; they're penciling it in, meaning that you can erase a pencil, right? That's what they're trying to say. That's what I love about language, by the way. Exporters of the commodities that Chinese consumes, that China consumes, will also benefit. Um, okay, so commodities are like basic. What? Let me just let the dictionary explain. Commodity, a substance or product that can be traded, bought, or sold. The country's most valuable commodities include tin and diamonds. Right? You know, in international commodities market. You got it right. Products. All right. Where were we? In China, consumes will also be left. A benefit will also benefit. The country buys a fifth of the world's oil, or half of its refined copper. Right. Oil over half of its refined copper, nickel and zinc, and more than 3/5 of its iron ore. Buys a fifth of the world's oil, right, over half of its refined copper. Um, okay, that's the prediction, right? So, okay, that's what they're gonna do. Elsewhere, though, China's recovery will have painful side effects. All right, elsewhere, uh, elsewhere, China's recovery will have painful side effects, right? So the China's recovery will have an effect on other countries. In much of the world, it could show up not in higher growth, right? It could show up not in higher growth, but in higher inflation or interest rates. All right, that's really nice. I mean, the way that I understand it, not how it could cause higher inflation. It's actually bad for us, I believe. Central banks are already raising rates at a frenetic pace to fight inflation. Okay, frenetic. Um, okay, pace to fight inflation. The prices will rise. Yes, will rise. All right. So frantic pace, meaning like very fast. All right. So frantic. All right. So frantic. Frantic means involving a lot of excited movement or activity, right? Frantic pace to fight inflation. If China's reopening increases price pressure, right, to an uncomfortable degree, price pressure, right, to an uncomfortable degree, increase something to an uncomfortable degree, uncomfortable degree. All right. So, to such a high degree that it will start to get uncomfortable. They will have to keep monetary policy tighter for longer. Um, Keep monetary, like monetary means related to money. All right. Policy tighter for longer. Meaning, I think that's what I couldn't quite understand it though. They will have to keep monetary policy tighter for longer. Let's see what it means. Countries that import commodities, including much of the West, are at the greatest risk of such disruption. Um, Reopening increases price pressure to an uncomfortable degree. They will have to keep monetary policies tighter for longer. Keep a policy tighter. So there will be some certain rules, right, in terms of money, and they will have to remain tight for long. Okay, so the prices will not. Um, yes, the prices will suffer. Countries that import commodities, right, including much of the West, like receive, right, are at the greatest risk of such disruption. The disruption being monetary policy being tighter. All right, so meaning inflation will be, all the rage. So okay, um, you guys can read up on how inflation works and how it happens, right? Uh, okay, at the greatest risk of such disruption, right? So yes, that makes sense because China, well, those countries that import commodities from China, right? They're at the risk of such disruption. So because there will be a lot of demand, all right, and the supply will be very little on China's part because like we just discussed, everybody will want to. Actually, a lot of countries are dependent on China, right? So take the oil market. I think, yeah, they're gonna shed some more light on what we've just read. Rising Chinese demand should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and America as their economies slow. Um, all right, Chinese demand should more than compensate. Oh, I actually know what compensate means, but I meant to, let's see, faltering, right? Faltering. What does it mean? Falter. To lose strength or purpose and stop or almost stop. Okay. Almost stop. Take the oil market. Rising Chinese demand. All right. So um, should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and America. Okay. So what they mean is if Chinese themselves raise their demand, right? It will, it will help prevent the faltering, prevent the weakening consumption in Europe. It should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and America as their economy is slow. What do they mean by that? Um, Demand should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and America. Um, Take the oil market. Oh, I know. I see now. Like the oil market, right? So when the demand of Chinese people for the oil market increases, right? Um, it will compensate, right, for faltering consumption in Europe and America. Um, oh, I see. So Europe and America are consuming oil, right? Um, you know, not as let's say as great amounts as Chinese would do, right? So when Chinese, right, demand more oil, the economies of Europe and America will slow, right? As the economies of these slow, um, that should compensate, meaning that um, okay, it's really hard still. Rising Chinese demand should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe um, as their economy is slow. So I'll tell you this, like Chinese demand, all right. So as more Chinese people demand oil, right, it will compensate, meaning that it will make up for uh, or let's say it will be the same as uh, the consumption in Europe and America, right? You see, like um, that's how great the effect of China is, right? According to Goldman Sachs, a bank, all right, a rapid recovery in China could help push the prices of Brent crude oil to $100 a barrel, right? An increase of a quarter compared with today's prices. Wow, it will increase by quarter means it's like, is it like 15 or 45? Uh, a quarter, yeah, it's probably like 15, right? It will increase a quarter compared with today's prices, right? 15% increase, right? Though still below the heights reached after Russia invaded Ukraine. All right, still below the uh, heights reached after Russia invaded Ukraine. Um, okay, rising energy costs will prove another hurdle, right? Prove another hurdle to taming inflation. So, um, well, when the energy costs, rise, right? So it will be another hurdle to taming inflation. Tame inflation is like trying to stop inflation, right? Tame is like limit, right? To control something. To in order if it will definitely be hurdle means challenge, right? Challenge to taming inflation, to containing inflation. Now, let me try to understand this even better now. Take the oil market. Rising Chinese demand should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and compensate for faltering consumption in Europe. Faltering. Is it an adjective to give you faltering? The legislation is designed to stimulate the faltering economy. All right, so demand should more than compensate for faltering consumption in Europe and America as their economy is slow. According to Goldman Sachs, a bank, right? It's a bank. A rapid recovery in China could help push the price of Brent crude oil to $100 a barrel. Barrel is like barrel, a container of some sort. All right. If in the oil, a barrel of oil is equal to 159 liters. All right. So 159 liters will be each 159 liters will increase by $100, an increase of a quarter compared with today's prices. Okay, I guess that makes sense, you guys. For Europe, China's reopening is another reason. Oh, sorry. It is another reason to not be complacent. All right. So, uh, about gas supplies later in the year. Okay, for Europe, Chinese reopening is another reason not to be complacent about gas supplies later in the year. What does it mean, complacent? Okay. Feeling so satisfied with your own abilities or situation that you feel you do not need to try any harder. Okay, so to not be complacent about gas supplies later in the year. Okay, so what they mean is Europe doesn't have to worry about its gas supplies later in the year because it can use China's, I believe, right? Is another reason not to be complacent. Not is another reason not to be complacent about gas supplies. They can still not worry about gas supplies, like about gas supplies dwindling, right? Zero COVID, by suppressing China's demand for gas, made it less costly than it otherwise would have been for Europe to fill its storage tanks in 2022. Um, okay, so because suppressing China's demand for gas, right? So because of zero COVID, I mean everybody was in lockdown, so they didn't need gas, right? And it made it less costly than it otherwise would have been for Europe to fill its storage tanks in 2022, right? So they could rely on China, even more. Uh, so made it less costly. Now I'm like, at this point I'm focusing more on the message than on these words, right, you guys? So then it otherwise would have been. Then it otherwise would have been. By that they mean if it hadn't been for zero COVID, what the storage tanks would be more costly, right? So um, a strong recovery in China will mean more competition for imports of liquefied natural gas. Will mean more competition for imports of liquefied natural gas. Look at how mean is used, so naturally. A strong recovery is nice as well. A strong recovery in China will mean more competition for imports of liquefied natural gas. In December, the International Energy Agency, a forecaster, warned of a scenario in which winter starts punctually, right, in 2023, in which winter starts punctually in 2023, and Russia cuts off piped gas to Europe entirely. Cuts off piped gas to Europe entirely. Okay, so it starts giving Europe pipe gas. Now, let me just see what. Let me just check. Starts punctually. What do they mean by punctually? Probably like starts in time, right? Okay, yeah, I see. Starts punctually in 2023, right? Um, that could result in shortages amounting to as much as, right? If you guys remember, we talked about this yesterday. As much as little as, or as many as, right? That could result in shortages amounting to as much as 7% of the continent's annual consumption. All right, um, continent's annual consumption. All right, I see. Forcing it in to introduce what rationing. Rationing means a system of limiting the amount of something that each person is allowed to have. Okay, that's nice. I mean, the way I was able to understand it. Fuel, for example, fuel rationing, right? So that's what they mean here, or gas rationing here in this particular sense. That could result in shortages amounting to as much as 7% of the continent's annual consumption, forcing it to introduce rationing. So in Europe, there'll be gas shortages, all right? All right. For China itself, the post-pandemic normal will not be a return to the status quo ante. Um, the post-pandemic normal will not be a return, will not, a post-pandemic meaning after pandemic normal, will not be a return to the status quo ante. Status quo ante was something like status quo itself means what ante is I knew it, but I forgot. The amount of money that each person must risk in order to be ante, before or in front of. Uh, so before the status quo, right? So return to the status quo ante. It means like the status quo before, so that like before pandemic, right? So anti-pandemic, before the pandemic hits, like it will not be returned to the status quo ante. It will not be all the same, right? Something that the situation um, of, let's say, 2016 or 17, right? It will not be returned. After watching the government enforce zero COVID in a draconian fashion, uh, okay, enforce zero COVID, meaning, enforce it or introduce it in such a great fashion, in a draconian fashion. So draconian is like big, I believe, like draconian, I think. Draconian means describes laws, governments, actions that are extremely severe or go further than what is right or necessary. Wow. Again, I'm telling you guys, the Economist is great. But yes, it's a little hard to digest sometimes. In a draconian fashion, and then scrap it without due preparation. Yes, they scrap it uh, without due preparation. Like they didn't enforce any, or you don't enforce a relaxation, but they just didn't lift the regulations like slowly, but they just scrapped it without due preparation. Many investment houses now see China as a riskier bet. Many see China as a riskier bet. All right. Meaning that they don't believe in it as much as they believed in it, let's say, before pandemic. Foreign firms are less confident that their operations will not be disrupted, meaning that their operations will be disrupted, right? Look at the double negative, right? So less confident that their operations will not be disrupted. Many are willing to pay higher costs to manufacture elsewhere. Okay, now willing to pay higher costs to manufacture elsewhere. Uh, Inbound investment in new factories seems to be slowing. Inbound, what do they mean by inbound? Um, Traveling towards a particular point. We expect delays to both inbound and outbound trades. Um, so, okay, probably inbound investment in new factories seems to be slowing, while the number of companies moving businesses outside China has jumped. Oh, I see. So inbound investment, like investment in China, right? Inbound investment in new factories seems to be slowing. In new factories seems to be slowing, while the number of companies moving. Okay, so this is basically the opposite of what is said. Inbound investment is the same thing as businesses moving outside, right? While the number of companies moving business outside has jumped by some accounts. By some accounts means by some people, right? Uh, I mean, by some statistics, by some, well, yes, sources. This is what that's the case, right? Normal, not normal. And as Chinese officials struggle to repair the damage, and pay attention to the structure as well as, right? As something happens, something else happens. They should remember some history. Remember some history. So you see how the progression of the ideas is just quite impressive. The way that the Economist editors have been able to put it in such a progressive manner is just mind blowing. I mean, look at how smooth it is, how swift it is. China's previous great reopening after the stultifying, um, stultifying isolation, right, of the Mao years led to an explosion of prosperity as goods, people, investment, and ideas surged across its borders in both directions. Um, Led to an explosion of prosperity. All right, explosion of prosperity. Prosperity. I forgot what it meant. The state of being successful. All right, explosion of prosperity. What do they mean by that? Led to an explosion of prosperity, right? Meaning that the prosperity exploded. Okay, explosion of prosperity, right? Probably the disruption of success, right? Prosperity as goods, people, investment, and ideas surged across its borders. Surged across its borders, meaning the ideas and like goods surged across its borders, not inside it, right? Borders in both directions, right? So across its borders in both directions, in right. Both China and the world have benefited from such flows, right? Something politicians in Beijing and Washington seldom acknowledge. Uh, all right, benefited from such flows. Something politicians in Beijing and Washington seldom acknowledge. Seldom acknowledge, meaning acknowledge very rarely. Uh, with luck, right? With luck means in the future. We hope that, right? So China's current reopening will ultimately succeed, but some of the paranoid, xenophobic mood that the party stoked during the pandemic years will surge linger, right? Some of the paranoid mood that the party stoked. What does it mean, stoke? To encourage bad ideas or feelings in a lot of people. Oh yeah, I see. So the party stoked during the pandemic years, right? What did it stoke? Paranoid, xenophobic mood, right? Will surely linger. Linger Linger means to take a long time to leave or disappear. All right, so I think we like linger. Uh, it was the first day. I forgot. Oh my god. Okay, so linger will surely linger. Mood will linger. Right? So like paranoid, xenophobic, mood. Xenophobic. What does it mean? Xenophobic. And how do you pronounce that?
Xenophobic.
Xenophobic. Oh, xenophobic. Uh, no, phobic. Like hating other, foreigners, like customs, their religions. Wow, that's a nice word. I didn't know that. Xenophobic mood will linger. Exactly how open new China will be remains to be seen. Remains to be seen. It means that we don't know, right? How open new China will be remains to be seen. So that's how the Economist writes articles, and as you can see, it is a little heavy for non, you know, for techies like for non-techies like us, like for lay people like me, for example. I don't really have any specialist knowledge in this area, but like I said, it's not because the communication, right? Not because the way the Economist writes is hard to understand. It's just that we're not. I'm not a native speaker. So yes, that's pretty much it. I hope you've learned something new from this article, and I recommend that you keep reading this until you understand it 100%. Well, almost 100%. There's no way of being able to understand such articles. I mean, at least for me, right? Based on the economy, it's a little hard for me to digest. Now, everybody, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next ones. Bye bye.